sponge, they could release the water that was causing the malfunction. And the slack skin that I saw in myself and a few other people, one man said when he had a heaping teaspoon of pregnenolone, he woke up the next morning looking like he had had a facelift. That, I think, is the same thing. The connective tissues of the body, whether in the lungs or the tissue around the eye socket or the fascia that keeps the skin together, all of those tissues tend to become inert and waterlogged when they're deprived of energy and nutrients, and they are under the influence of estrogen. Sometimes they're producing estrogen, but they're unable to use oxygen efficiently. The cells actually develop a smooth muscle-like function where they had been apparently nothing but a fibroblast connective tissue cell. They now contract and return to their normal conformation.
What do you suggest if women are on progesterone already? Can they also take pregnenolone, and can men take pregnenolone as well? Or does it depend what other hormones you're taking? Or does it convert to anything else? How does it work?
I tested a large amount of progesterone, various amounts on myself, and found that just like Hans Selye had accidentally found out that a large dose of progesterone is an anesthetic, it has an effect sort of like alcohol. It can completely anesthetize you.
You're talking about progesterone.
Progesterone,
now.
yes.
Okay.
Don't want to overdose on that. But it does have many of the same protective effects, for example, in emphysema and any edematous tissue. Progesterone is one of the factors that will restore function to the tissues. But since pregnenolone doesn't have any of those anesthetic actions, you can take any amount of pregnenolone without any harmful side effects, where you should limit your progesterone, dosing it gradually just until the symptoms disappear.
I take 200 milligrams of progesterone before I sleep.
Yeah, that's the sedative effect.
It's fantastico. Now, pregnenolone is also known as being really good for your brain.
Studies during the Second World War showed that when people were working in a bayonet factory, they were getting paid per bayonet. And one group was given just a moderate supplement of pregnenolone every day. The others had a placebo. And then they would switch the groups, and they found that the groups who were getting the supplement without knowing it, they simply produced more pieces per day and made more money. It made them able to cope with boring, repetitive work and work more efficiently. A couple of times I saw men who were not quite suicidal but extremely depressed talking about quitting their job and just giving up. And they both happened to be sitting in a dark corner of the room with a glass of wine, wanting to retreat, even within the room as well as from life in general. And thinking about the old bayonet studies and such, I put a pinch of pregnenolone on their wine, and within about 15 minutes, in both cases, they were grinning and talking about projects and went back to work and were just as happy as they could ever be.
So it must do something to the brain, too. It's supposed to be very good for the brain.
Yeah, but progesterone has those same effects.
So why isn't pregnenolone and progesterone considered kind of a motherlode of hormones?
Well, they're the basic protective steroid hormones. When everything is going well, when you haven't been poisoned with fish oil and chicken fat and so on, you make those at a high rate. By the time a person is 35 or 40, the body is becoming pretty soaked in those unsaturated fats. In animal studies, if you look what happens to various animals when they're fed a diet lacking linolenic acid and DHA and EPA, for example, they make more progesterone, more testosterone.
How interesting.
It's like they stay in the puberty stage just for being deficient in the so-called essential fatty acids.
It's the direct opposite of what we're being told. How fascinating. Do you want to speak at all about memory?
Yeah. Progesterone and pregnenolone, obviously, since they improve mood and all of the body functions, there have been a lot of studies showing that they improve all mental functions, including memory. Katharina Dalton, in her early book on premenstrual syndrome, showed that high estrogen impaired brain functions, and progesterone prevented those and restored brain functions so that women could do math, for example, as well as men, and didn't have the mental problems that commonly come with both menopause and premenstrual syndrome. The effect of estrogen on the brain is to excite it very much the way cocaine does. It activates some of the same enzymes. And if you increase that, just like overdosing on cocaine, overdosing on estrogen causes epileptic seizures and mania and other processes of excess excitation. Progesterone at one extreme is anesthetic, but in its normal range of functioning, it produces calmness and prevents those extremes of excitation. And that's the sort of mental process that is good for calm, long-range memory. The thyroid, by raising the body temperature and increasing progesterone, the two of them work together to stabilize the body temperature at a high point where estrogen lowers the body temperature. Thyroid and progesterone reinforce each other. Each one increases the other if they aren't poisoned with unsaturated fats, for example. And raising the body temperature and the available energy to brain cells, they improve all kinds of mental functioning. That's why you can see demented people in just a matter of days become completely normal.
With pregnenolone?
Well, thyroid, progesterone, pregnenolone, all of them, or any of them, I've seen it happen. A woman who had been epileptic for 18 years, every year her neurologist would give her an IQ test and tell her how far towards complete dementia she had progressed. She spent almost all of her day in bed. When she was up, she wasn't allowed out of the house by herself because she would get lost. With just progesterone in her case, even though she needed thyroid, in, I think it was 5 days, she came back to my house all by herself, completely normal, and was able to work, doing normal things. And she went back to graduate school, where she had been considered to be basically an idiot. She went back to graduate school, got straight A's, got her master's degree the next year, after 18 years of dementia.
How impressive. Let's talk a little bit about T3, T4, and free T3, free T4, and about the way we test for thyroid. What's your take on this, Ray?
Well, first, the whole idea of a free hormone, it means something, but when you start applying it as if it was really a physical reality, people get confused and start thinking about membranes and barriers and things that don't really have anything to do with reality. But the test that they call the free T3 test does correspond fairly well to functions, but I just don't pay much attention to it because the function is what you should be attending to rather than a blood test that, even though it's right 90% of the time, sometimes it isn't right because other things are interfering. To interpret the free T3, you still have to really know what the reverse T3 is because that can interfere with it. And high T4 in itself can interfere at a certain point with the T3. They can compete for the same functions. And of the blood tests that people ordinarily do, I think the TSH is useful. I pretty much go by a study that found that a population that had the lowest incidence